Okay, we are here for another episode of Perspective on Athletics, and today we have with us Sean Sullivan. He is the Associate Vice President and Director of Athletics at the Catholic University of America, a Division III institution in Washington, D.C. So Sean's going to be talking about some great stuff that I think is facing lots of small colleges and universities today, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. But Sean, first, thank you so much for taking time out of your, I think, vacation week and joining us here on Perspective on Athletics.
I appreciate the opportunity, Mark. It's a staycation, so you're giving me a little time away from childcare, so this is great.
Well, whatever we can do to help in that regard, that's what we're here for. But Sean, I really appreciate you taking time, like I said, and I've known you for a long time, and I've watched your career escalate, through the world of college athletics over the last couple of decades, it feels like. And before we get into talking about this very important topic related to athletics and enrollment management, for people that are watching that may not know you, can you just give us a brief sketch, an overview of your career track and where you've been and how you got to the place you're at today?
Sure. Well, like many officials in college athletics, I began, of course, as a college athlete and found that was really the environment that I wanted to stay in, and kind of immediately found my way into coaching, as you may remember working with you. And ultimately decided that after a number of years of coaching, I wanted to stay in college athletics, but maybe wanted to get into more upper level decision making. And so I made the shift into administration. I've had the formal opportunity to work at both the large research universities, such as UC Santa Cruz, to the small liberal arts college, such as York College of Pennsylvania. Had the opportunity to work in recreation at a large Division I institution, Boston College, and then another smaller research-based institution in athletics at Clark University in Massachusetts. So I've had the opportunity to work a bit at the larger school, perhaps out in California, and then a number of smaller schools on the East Coast, bumping around between the Mid-Atlantic and New England.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. And as you think about the differences between a larger research type institution and a small private institution, do you have a preference? Is there a big difference for you?
Well, with the larger institution, of course, you'd always love the resources, or at least the perception of what the resources may be. But certainly at the small college Division III level, where I've had the good fortune of being able to spend most of my career, the ability to really connect and make close professional relationships, and of course the relationships that you can create with the student athletes, I think that really speaks to me personally. It's where I feel most content and at home.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's terrific, and that's very fitting, and that's a big part of why you're here. This Perspective on Athletics webcast and website is all about really the small college environment. So that's where we're focusing our efforts. So it's appropriate that we're going to be talking about that today. And I want to transition to our topic for today, and I believe it's something that many, many small colleges and universities today are facing and are challenged by, and it's the issue of enrollment management. It's the issue of year after year making the class with the right numbers and being able to utilize athletics effectively. And I think there are situations where some institutions do and some institutions do not necessarily leverage athletics for really the benefits it could bring to the enrollment management process. And then once the students are there, how do you keep them there, and carving out a niche and what makes your institution different? And I think we're all facing these challenges. And I know you and I have had a conversation where that's, like you said, part of your day-to-day life. And we wanted to hear more about that from your perspective on this whole idea of athletics, supporting the enrollment management piece, but really finding students that you're going to be able to enroll and then retain. So let's open there and just have you start talking about what your world is like these days.
Well, you said it. It's a part of my everyday as a college athletics administrator. As the demographics, the college-going population in the future continues to get smaller and smaller, schools become much more focused, or need to become much more focused on being highly effective in their outreach efforts to reach out to prospective students, to, in a sense, persuade or convince them that their institution is the right fit, and then ultimately getting them to come and enroll and keeping them at your institution. As the economy continues to go up and down and being as unstable as it is, schools rather are increasingly faced with difficult financial and philosophical decisions that they must make. And it's my hope, through being able to work with you today and discuss this topic, I'm hoping to shed some light on some of my experiences on how to make sure what may be a financial decision on one hand must be integrated and connected to the philosophies and mission of the institution on the other.
And I think that's what it comes down to, and too many people miss that everybody needs to be aligned with what you're trying to do. And athletics sometimes is an outcast either by their own choice or by being ignored from other parts of the university or college. But so what does that look like for you? You're the athletic director, you're in charge, you've got a number of coaches, a number of sports, a substantial percentage of the undergraduate population, so there's impact with everything that athletics does when it comes to enrollment. What are some of the things that you're doing, or what does that look like for you at Catholic?
Well, the athletic department works with admissions and financial aid, or shall we say the enrollment management team, every day, and the communication and the contact is constant, from working with our prospective pool of student athletes to get a gauge as to whether or not they're admissible, to working with financial aid to understand how to speak to students about guiding them through the financial aid process. And then ultimately, when admissions has been taken care of and financial aid has been taken care of, then we all work together, or we must all work together to ultimately make, in my case, Catholic University just the standout institution for that family to consider. So it's very specific. Each individual recruit actually has to become a separate conversation, so that a recruit is not just a name on a piece of paper or in a database. They understand admissions and financial aid, understands how much the coaches are interested in them, how well we know them, how well we believe they will fit within our institution's profile, so that we're all in agreement that this is someone who will be successful at Catholic.
But how do you know that you're finding the right fit? I think that's something that's interesting to me, is that it's so much about differentiation these days. You know, what's going to make you different from the 18, colleges right down the road? And how do you convince prospective students that Catholic is the right institution for them? And what's that process look like? How do you zero in?
Well, certainly every institution, I would believe, has their own song and dance, or how they brand themselves or market themselves to make them seem a bit special or unique from the other cast of schools that may be out there. Of course, as the Catholic University of America, we have a certain cachet with a certain segment of the population, which kind of automatically gets us on their list. But what ultimately has to happen is that the athletic coaches they must really dig into understanding not just whether or not we think we can see this young man or young woman enroll at Catholic, but we need to understand whether or not they can get in, they can afford it, they will academically be able to do the work, they have the mindset and kind of the social skills to be able to handle the campus community effectively. So what has to happen is that not only must we work with admissions very carefully so that they know these prospective students as well as we do, but we must, as coaches, get to a point that we're only bringing certain students to the table, the admissions table, so to speak, the financial aid table, so to speak, that we know will be successful. We really have to peel the layers back on the onion to get at as focused a class of prospective students as possible. These are the young men and young women who are going to be successful here. Those are the individuals that we try to bring to admissions and financial aid's attention.
So what does that look like? Is that just simply a matter of casting a wider net to try to bring in a bigger prospect pool to begin with, or how do you go about that?
Well, that's the whole ball of wax, Mark. It's a great question. And even talking with my own coaches, kind of the immediate gut reaction of wanting to be increasingly competitive and win conference championships, we have to land a higher level recruit. So what I'm going to do, Mr. AD, is I'm going to cast a wider net. And I used to talk to 3,000 prospective students. Now I'm going to talk to 6,000 prospective students. And while there may be some semblance of reasonableness to that idea, and it may work for some, I actually promote and suggest the opposite. I think the coaches absolutely have to really dig into who each prospective student is, what their family's background is, socioeconomic capability, whether or not they fit the academic profile of the institution to a T, whether or not they're truly interested in coming to your institution academically rather than just playing ball. I think we have to dig deeper and actually focus our pools to students that we know or that we feel a strong likelihood will be successful at your institution. And those are the students that I think we have to go all in on.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of the flip of what the natural reaction might be. Like you said, that's interesting. So
it's counterintuitive. Yeah. You're right. It's not the natural reaction, but ultimately, I tell the coaches this all the time. It's not an issue of how hard you work at recruiting.
Right.
It's an issue of how effective you are. And to be honest, and I think if we're all putting everything out on the table and being honest with one another, being effective means my list of 10 recruits, 9 of them are going to get in, 8 of them are going to enroll, and 7 of them are going to stay for 4 years and graduate.
Yeah, I think it's a relatively simple formula to look at it that way. I think that targeting the right people is the whole key, like you're saying. And it's amazing how much higher athletic yield typically is than the overall university. But speaking to that, so you mentioned that you work really day to day with the admissions office, and you're working very closely on making sure they understand how important these prospective student athletes are to your programs, but also they're good fits for the university. So what does it look like? How do you, for lack of better terms, close the deal? What is it that, how do you go about that to make sure that you're going to end up with those 8 student athletes that are going to enroll, or the 7 that you mentioned?
Well, obviously, what's really driving many family decisions today is, can they afford to come to your institution? Mm-hmm. So again, starting on the front end, if you understand your prospective student athlete pool really well, and you are engaged with a group who, for the lack of a better term, can't afford to come to Catholic, once they've been admitted, it's established that they can afford to come here, you're right. Then it's a competition in terms of how can we land those 8 or 9 or 10 of your original pool. And what it comes down to, of course, is your relationship with the family, and particularly that student athlete. Do you know them well enough to feel confident that they are making the decision to either come to Catholic or not to come to Catholic for the right reasons? Even if you don't land every one of them, that can be okay if you know that family well enough to understand, you know what, at the end of the day, this might not be the best fit for them. Mm-hmm. So it's, rather than casting that wider net, Mark, I actually really encourage in-depth effort at building relationships with those families so that you do understand how they fit within your institution. And when you establish those deeper relationships, they're going to understand you to a much greater degree and feel far more confident in either coming on board or being honest enough with you to say, you know what, coach, I'm going to go to State U down the road. Okay, no harm, no foul, we'll miss you. There's always a place for you here, but if that's the best decision for you, so be it. we support it.
The relationship-based approach, I think, comes more naturally to coaches and athletic personnel than it does admission staff sometimes. And I think that's where the communication going back and forth between athletics and admissions is so important, because you need to help them understand that this is a relationship business, and sometimes it's difficult when they're dealing with such large numbers sometimes, I suppose.
That's a great point. I've had this conversation with a number of my coaches throughout the years. We work so hard as coaches to get these young men and women, in a sense, all the way across the football field, and we get them to the goal line, and we just need to get them across into the end zone to get them to enroll. And for whatever the case may be, there may be an admissions-related concern, a financial-related concern, and you're right, to a senior official outside of athletics who may not have that deepened relationship, it's much easier to say that student doesn't qualify, or this student is going to get, a particular aid package. All of that may be fine and well and good, but you're right, it's so hard because athletics invests great time in developing those relationships that it can be crushing when it kind of falls apart right there at the goal line. So it does bring me back to my original point of, we need to know who these families are and who these kids are really before they get started.
Right. No, I think it's so true. And I think that even if you are effective, like you've described, and you've gotten those 8 students to enroll like you planned, that's only half the battle today for many colleges. Getting them enrolled is one thing. Keeping them there and retaining students year to year is another big issue across the board for small colleges, and I think athletics also can play a key role in that. But so talk about that side of it. You got them there, but now what's happening to keep them there?
Well, you're right. It's only half of the battle, and it's a huge piece. They're here, they're on campus. Hopefully they're playing ball and they're happy and they're engaged in their studies. But young people can also be fickle, and they can also be very interested in greener pastures elsewhere. And so from my experiences, what has to happen is that the well-being of a student on campus isn't the sole responsibility of the student affairs staff. The academic well-being of that student isn't the sole responsibility of the faculty. The athletic, the social, whatever the case, it isn't the responsibility of just the coaching staff. Everyone must be working together and must be communicating on a daily basis, if possible, in terms of how Susie or Joe might be doing in class, on the field, around campus, how they feel as though they fit in. And institutions must be aware of the signs of distress and when they may not be doing very well, and be willing to speak up and say, "Hey, coach, I was seeing this in class the other day. Are you experiencing any of these concerns with Joe? Let's talk about it." It's an everyday, every semester type of relationship that has to be established from across divisions, across all of campus.
Right. I think for me, my perspective and perception has always been that most campuses really don't understand the role of the coach and the powerful relationship that exists between students and coaches, and that coaches really are invaluable members of the student affairs staff. And I think some colleges really start to understand that these days, but others still are not. Are there ways that you found this approach to be effective on your campuses where you've been, this communication going back and forth? Are there things that you do that really help promote that?
Well, I think it's being willing to speak up and represent the coach's voice when working with the faculty or with the larger student affairs staff or even the senior administration, and gently or appropriately reminding them that coaches really have their kind of finger on the pulse of the well-being of the student athlete population. Again, can be anywhere between 10 to 30% of the undergraduate population. So you have these men and women who are working as not just athletic coaches, but mentors on an everyday basis with a large segment of the population you're right. You would think that their input and their knowledge base on the well-being of that population would be well received. Sometimes we just have to be willing to speak up and say, hey, I am spending a great deal of time with Susie as her coach. This is what I see. Yeah, I'm concerned as to why she might be having a hard time academically or socially, why she may be making some questionable decisions. Being willing to speak up and represent the coaching staff and their intimate knowledge of these young men and women is really crucial. It's a big part of my responsibility as a leader of that department.
I think it's a great point, and I think many of us have experienced maybe reluctance on the part of faculty to reach out and engage. But also, sometimes there's a difficulty getting coaches to understand that it's a two-way street as well. How have you worked with your coaches, or how does that play out the places that you've been, getting coaches to understand this kind of greater responsibility beyond their team?
Well, it's one of those reminders that need to be put out there from time to time that, okay, Joe, Susie, they may have come to Catholic largely because they were interested in playing a sport that you coach, but that is just one facet of their Division III holistic education. And because of that, coaches, you need to be aware of the demands on their time from their academics, from other programming that they may be interested into, from just being interested in being a college student and engaging in the campus culture. Some reminders of coaches that Division III small college athletics really is about holistic engagement. And it isn't always necessarily about whether or not they are available to come to your meeting or your practice at a specific time on a specific day. It's the reminders of the bigger picture that have to be given from time to time.
Yeah, great. Sean, this is all such important information for many small colleges and universities. And I want to give you a chance. We do need to transition to our next segment here. We could talk about this for hours, I know. But, to kind of sum up, what are some of the key things, or what is a key thing that you want people to be aware of? And what do you think is most important as you look at this topic yourself that people should be thinking about?
I believe, Mark, what is most important is that institutions need to be comprehensively aware of the motivators or the influences to their enrollment strategies, enrollment and retention strategies. For example, if a school perhaps is struggling financially and really driven by those tuition dollars, it's not uncommon for those institutions to maybe take a few chances and admit students who may not be the most immediate or natural academic fit for those schools. Well, that's all well and good on that part, at that part of the equation, but I would really want to encourage those institutions who are taking those chances to make sure that support systems are in place to aid those young men and women who may not immediately connect with that desired academic profile. Okay, you've admitted them, but how are you going to keep them enrolled? How are you going to help them be successful and graduate? The flip side of that equation, of course, involves the schools that may be a bit more financially stable and can really adhere to their academic profile and their strict admissions guidelines. Okay, so if they admit that type of class, they may encounter some student consumerism or entitlement issues that they'll have to contend with. So again, do they have the support systems in place? Do they have the relationships across divisions to interact with students on a very healthy level to help them not only live up to their part of the student-institution relationship, but make sure that those student consumerism attitudes are held in check, and that they realize that this wonderful opportunity to come to this school is accepted and embraced appropriately.
Yeah. It's an interesting and complex puzzle. There's no doubt about it. And I think that there is no institution that has figured it out perfectly from all different angles.
No.
It's going to be an ongoing struggle, especially as you mentioned, as the demographics change, more and more competition for students. And some of these smaller colleges are going to have to really work hard to even survive in many cases. So we could, again, talk about this for hours and days. And my hope is that we will have you back as well as some other professionals, both from athletics and the enrollment management side of things, and have a group discussion. I think it would be a healthy discussion to have multiple voices on this topic.
That'd be wonderful.
So I think we will do that again. But I do want to transition. We have another segment to these interviews where I always ask people about their general thoughts about leadership, and in particular as it relates to collegiate athletics today. There's so many things changing, especially at the Division I level. But as you think about leadership, and in particular for your role as a director of athletics, what do you think is important for leadership? Traits, qualities, skills? What do you think people should be thinking about?
Well, I mentioned a few minutes ago about helping students understand their part of the student and university relationship. What students must bring to that environment to be successful. And I think one element that is key for college athletics administrators to focus in on in the future is the ability to hold others to a certain level of expectation, but have a strong enough relationship so that they feel empowered to live up to those expectations. And it's a very delicate balancing act that must be developed. Again, relationships being the key. However, we must be able to empower our young people and our staffs to do the work that they have been asked to do. But at the same time, our responsibility to the institutions requires us to hold people accountable for their actions and their experiences. So being able to walk that line, develop that balance between empowerment and expectation, it's a key piece of what I think it is we do each day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it is one of the more challenging aspects of the job. But thanks for sharing that. And lastly, there are 200, 300 some masters and higher level programs in athletic management or sport management. You've gone through one, I know. People are always looking for ways to break into this industry and get their first job. And the reality is, I think there are far more students in these graduate programs than there are jobs out there. And you've had an interesting path that involved both, intercollegiate athletics and the recreation side, small schools, large schools, Division I, Division III. So if you were having a conversation with somebody that came to you and said, Sean, please help me. I really want to break into this business, ultimately be an AD one day. How can I do that? What advice would you share with that person?
Well, I think the proliferation of the graduate schools in the sport management field, while incredibly helpful to our industry, Mark, I think it can create this false sense of immediate capability of becoming an athletic director. Get your master's degree, you too can be an AD. And while some people may be able to do that, at the Division III level, we have to remember that there are only 450 of these jobs out there, and they're very difficult to get. And so if there's a young person who's interested in getting into specifically small college athletics administration, my advice to them is recognize that this is a process, and that while you may have really wonderful aspirations to be at the top of the departmental hierarchy very quickly, understand that it's going to take some time. And because of that, structure your career path so that you are open to any possible idea, any possible location. Take, for example, Division III athletic directors, as you know, Mark, they wear many hats. They do many things on a daily basis. Therefore, if the only job opportunity a young person has at a graduate school is working in a community recreation center, that's okay. Take that job. Learn recreation. Learn how to work with local communities, putting on events. things of that magnitude. If the only opportunity out of school is to work for the local franchise in event management, learn events, learn how to put on games, contests, whatever the case may be. If the avenue you have is coaching, follow that. Open yourself up to whatever it is it may be, because a small college athletics administrator, their background typically is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. And so this path to your AD job should be, I would think, littered with a variety of very diverse experiences. Don't say no just because you may not think it immediately ties in. Believe it, at a Division III level, it does tie in.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's an appropriate description of the Division III or any small college environment. Many hats, many duties, and a background littered with experiences. I love that phrase. So thank you for sharing that. That was great. Well, Sean, we were able to just scratch the surface on a very important topic related to athletics and enrollment management, and I hope that we'll have you back again and we can talk more about that. But I do want to thank you again for taking time and joining us to share your perspective here today.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity. Happy to help at any time. Best of luck with this entire series.
Great. Thank you very much. And again, we'll wrap up with that. This has been Sean Sullivan, Associate Vice President and Director of Athletics at the Catholic University of America. Thanks again. This has been Perspective on Athletics.